31-year-old Lewis Haynes was at the Out nightclub in Pembroke, southwest Wales, on the night of December the 16th of 2021. An oil refinery worker by trade, Haynes started chatting with an 18-year-old girl by the name of Lily Sullivan. Despite the fact that he was in a relationship at the time, the pair left the club separately but then started conversing outside. Haynes subsequently led the teen into a darkened alleyway near a town mill pond. In the early hours of December the 17th, while Sullivan was on the phone with her mother, Haynes began forcing himself on her. She resisted his advances and indicated she'd be reporting the incident to the authorities. The man then flew into a violent rage and, in a bid to silence his victim, strangled her before tossing her body in the pond. As the fatal attack was unfolding in the alley, Sullivan's mother called her phone roughly 30 times, as shown in grainy CCTV footage in which the teen's phone lit up repeatedly while she was being assaulted. Sullivan's remains were recovered from the water shortly after 4:30 a.m. Her cause of death was ruled as strangulation. A few days later, Haynes was arrested and charged in connection with her death. The man denied murder, claiming he'd gone into the water to try and save her before she drowned. Judge Paul Thomas QC of Swansea Crown Court rejected Haynes' defense and ultimately sentenced him to life in prison with a minimum term of 23 years and 4 months. Number 7. Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon was a standout college football player at the University of Oklahoma, where he earned first-team All-Big 12 honors in 2016. He was projected as a first-round talent going into the 2017 NFL Draft, but many experts predicted he might fall to a later round given his troubling history. Back on July the 25th of 2014, Mixon was involved in a physical altercation with a young woman by the name of Amelia Molitor. According to police records, then 18-year-old Mixon was among a group of friends and teammates outside a restaurant in the Campus Corner area of Norman that night. They allegedly began harassing another group consisting of Molitor and a friend. The confrontation started only hours after Mixon had turned 18, so his buddies began crudely suggesting that Molitor go home with him as a birthday present, even providing specific suggestions for how she should pleasure him. Molitor, who admitted to being intoxicated at the time, initially laughed it off, but she was then followed into the restaurant by Mixon, who continued pestering her. As shown in surveillance footage, the two began arguing and eventually got into a physical fight. Molitor pushed Mixon away and slapped his face, prompting him to punch her, sending her crashing into a table. The young woman reportedly required surgery to repair the 4 broken bones she'd suffered in her face. In the legal proceedings that followed, Mixon entered an Alford plea to misdemeanor assault, maintaining his innocence. He was given a 1-year deferred sentence and was ordered to undergo cognitive behavioral counseling, as well as complete 100 hours of community service. The 5-star football recruit was also suspended for the entirety of his freshman season. Mixon ended up falling to the second round in the 2017 draft and settled a federal lawsuit filed by Molitor in April of that year. Number 6. Joseph Seidel. In April of 2018, a 22-year-old woman from Land O'Lakes, Florida, contacted the Pasco County Sheriff's Office about a man who'd been stalking her. According to the unidentified woman, she'd been approached at her place of work by a strange man who proceeded to ask her out. She turned him down, but he was persistent and asked her a second time. Upon being rejected once again, the man, identified as 62-year-old Joseph Seidel, asked one of her co-workers for her full name. He looked her up on the internet and eventually stumbled upon her address through the Pasco County Property Appraiser's website. Seidel subsequently penned a 2-page letter in which he discussed their possible future together, saying that although she'd said no to his advances, he could tell that she really meant yes. He mailed the letter to the address he'd found, prompting the victim to contact the authorities. Seidel was arrested for stalking, but as of the latest available updates, it's unclear how the case ultimately played out from there. Number 5. Elizabeth Hiley. Florida woman Elizabeth Hiley was entertaining a 25-year-old man at her home in Windmill Village on the night of June the 16th of 2014. Police reports revealed that at around midnight, Hiley told her guest, identified as Crew Finley, that she wanted to have intercourse with him, but he refused. After that, she allegedly became angry and violent. Hiley grabbed a large knife and tried to slice Finley with it, cutting his left thumb in the process. When deputies from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office arrived at the scene, they observed Hiley still chasing the young man with the knife, as well as a broken wooden cane. Hiley, who appeared to be intoxicated, complied with the arresting officers and was subsequently booked into jail on assault charges. Number 4. Fang Liu. On January the 30th of 2014, an entire family was wiped out during a targeted attack at their residence just outside of Houston, Texas. 50-year-old Mai Yi's son, his wife Mai Shi, and their 2 sons were found in separate rooms of the house, each of them with bullet holes in their heads. During the ensuing investigation, detectives began looking into a man by the name of Fang Liu. The latter, then in his early 50s, reportedly worked for the oil and gas company Cameron International Corporation, where Mao Yi was one of his superiors. Liu told investigators that he'd recently tried to transfer to a better position in a different department within the company, and he asked Mao Yi to put a good word in for him. Liu's bid for the promotion was rejected, and his co-workers allegedly began treating him differently. This led him to believe that Mao Yi had not only refused to recommend him for the job, but also made derogatory remarks that changed the way his colleagues perceived him. Although Liu admitted to being angry with Mao Yi over the incident, he categorically denied any involvement in the brutal slaying of his family. The case languished for the next 8 years with very few developments. Investigators believed that Liu was their man, but they didn't have the evidence to arrest him, and he fled to China in the massacre's aftermath. In September of 2022, Liu boarded a flight bound for San Francisco. Upon his arrival in the States, he was taken into police custody after the authorities had finally linked him to the Sun family murders using DNA recovered from a purse at the original crime scene. Liu faced capital murder charges in the wake of his arrest. Number 3. Robert Scott. 78-year-old Robert Scott from Texas had his unwanted advances rejected by an aspiring model nearly 50 years his junior. On November the 12th of 2016, the man reportedly approached a 29-year-old woman outside a DoubleTree hotel in Kenner, Louisiana. He told her, "You look like a model. We should go out. I can treat you real well." The woman declined, telling Scott she had a boyfriend. Unfazed by the rebuff, Scott then proposed that they enter into a sugar daddy type of arrangement, while allegedly becoming increasingly forward in his advances. The woman told Scott to get out of her face, at which point the elderly man unbuckled his belt and dropped everything, underpants and all, to the ground. He then proceeded to moon the young woman, exposing a portion of his genitals in the process. Scott, who was outfitted in a cowboy hat and blue jeans, was subsequently arrested and booked at the county jail on obscenity charges. Today's topic was requested by Lady Porsche, aka Jose's Blade. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Kenyetta McKinney. At around 7:20 p.m. on July the 20th of 2018, Missouri woman Kenyetta McKinney rode with a female friend to the Speedy gas station at Compton and Chippewa in St. Louis. While the friend ran inside to grab a drink, McKinney reportedly got behind the wheel and took off with her friend's 9-month-old baby seated in the back. The 22-year-old subsequently sent her friend a message telling her she'd stolen her car and infant child because she'd rejected McKinney's advances and refused a romantic relationship with her. An officer who later spotted the stolen car attempted a traffic stop, but the jilted woman refused to pull over. She started speeding and barreled into oncoming traffic before intentionally ramming head-on into a police car. McKinney was apprehended, but the baby was nowhere to be found. The woman admitted to abandoning the child in an alley near South Jefferson Avenue and Arsenal Street. Fortunately, the infant was subsequently found unharmed and returned to his mother. For her reckless outburst, McKinney was charged with child kidnapping, assault, stealing, armed criminal action, resisting arrest, and endangering the welfare of a child. Her bond was set at a reported $50,000. If you think you'll still be craving more of our crime content after number 1, then we're tuning up our earlier release on when breakups go wrong for you right after this. Stay put if you'd like. Number 1. Dimitrios Pagourtzis. Gunfire broke out at a Santa Fe high school in Texas at about 7:30 a.m. on May the 18th of 2018. The gunman, armed with a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun and a .38 caliber revolver, first shot up 2 of the interconnected rooms in the school's art complex. At one point, a staff member managed to pull the fire alarm, triggering a campus-wide evacuation while the shooter was still active. According to an eyewitness account, the gunman would sing the lyrics to "Another One Bites the Dust" in between shots. The city's independent school district police had officers stationed at the school, who exchanged fire with the suspect. One of the officers was wounded and subsequently hospitalized in critical condition. After firing into the ceramics room, the shooter was confronted by another school district officer, as well as a Texas Highway Patrol trooper. Law enforcement attempted to persuade the gunman to surrender peacefully, but he continued shooting while arguing with the police. Eventually, the suspect was wounded, at which point he surrendered. In all, 10 people were killed, and 13 others were injured as a result of the attack. The individual responsible, identified as a student at the school named Dimitrios Pagourtzis, was arrested and charged with multiple counts of capital murder and aggravated assault. As the investigation got underway, details regarding Pagourtzis' problematic state of mind began to trickle out. He had reportedly experienced repeated bullying at the hands of his classmates, with some fellow students labeling him a weird loner who never seemed right. Additionally, the parents of 16-year-old Shana Fisher, one of the 8 students slain in the shooting, publicly revealed that their daughter had rejected Pagourtzis' advances on numerous occasions over the preceding months. They accused him of pestering Fisher to go on a date with him for 4 months before she finally stood up to him a week before the attack and implored him to stop. It's been theorized that Fisher's repeated rejection played at least a partial factor in Pagourtzis' decision to target his classmates. The suspect was evaluated by multiple doctors, all of whom deemed him incompetent to stand trial. The next conference in connection with his competency was slated for May of 2023. Number 7. George Hughley. In May of 2010, Yeardley Love and her ex-boyfriend, George Hughley, were close to graduating from the University of Virginia. Both were star lacrosse athletes and had engaged in an on-again, off-again romance since their freshman years. Their relationship was turbulent at times, mainly due to Hughley's heavy drinking and violent outbursts while under the influence. At one point, he'd attempted to strangle Love and then sent her an email claiming he wished he'd killed her. His alcohol abuse gradually got worse when he became a senior and as graduation was approaching. It was also during that year that he and Love, both 22 at the time, had broken up. Hughley's teammates were on the verge of preparing an intervention for him but decided to wait until after the upcoming lacrosse tournaments. As Hughley's drinking increased, so did his aggressiveness. He reportedly beat up a teammate while he was sleeping for leaving a party with Love. On May the 3rd of 2010, Hughley went to his ex-girlfriend's off-campus apartment. It was there that an argument erupted, resulting in the drunk and enraged athlete beating Love repeatedly and inflicting fatal injuries by smashing her head against a wall. Love's roommates found her lying in a pool of her own blood with extensive wounds to her neck, face, and jaw. Hughley was arrested following the attack and ultimately sentenced to 23 years in prison for second-degree murder. Number 6. Benjamin Green. On the night that she tried breaking up with him on August the 27th of 2021, a young marketing executive was stabbed to death by her boyfriend. The incident took place in Kettering, Northamptonshire, England. 22-year-old Maddie Durdant Hollenby had been arguing with boyfriend Benjamin Green, 19 years her senior, about her decision of going on holiday without him. Her mother later told a media outlet that she'd headed to his home with the intention of putting an end to their relationship. Friends then wondered why she hadn't joined a group call and became further concerned when it emerged that Durdant Hollenby had missed a work meeting. One of the young woman's friends went to her home and contacted the police when there was no answer. As the authorities checked Green's residence, they found both their bloody bodies lying alongside each other on the floor. Investigators determined that Green had fatally stabbed Durdant Hollenby before turning the blade on himself. The couple had been dating for about a year, and the horrific incident shocked all who knew them, as there'd been no reports of domestic abuse or signs to indicate that Green was unstable. Number 5. Iftaha Murtaza. In May of 2007, one of the most brutal slayings in Orange County history occurred in the Anaheim Hills community. 18-year-old Sheona Danak had broken up with boyfriend Iftaha Murtaza, then in his early 20s, because her family didn't approve of him. It was reported that cultural and religious differences had also played a role, since Murtaza was Muslim, while Danak hailed from a Hindu background. The latter's family threatened to stop paying her college tuition if she didn't separate from Murtaza, which she consequently did. A few months later, in an ill-conceived attempt at getting back together with her, Murtaza planned to kill Danak's family, whom he perceived as an obstacle. Along with 2 accomplices to whom he'd promised payment, he went to the Danak family's mansion in Anaheim Hills and abducted 3 of them. Murtaza stabbed his ex-girlfriend's father, 56-year-old Jay Prakash, at least 27 times and struck him in the head with such force that he fractured his skull. He then slit the throat of Danak's sister, Karishma, aged 20. She was still alive as Murtaza doused both her and Jay Prakash in gasoline and then set them ablaze. Their badly burnt bodies were recovered from near a bike trail in Irvine, where first responders had been called to reports of a bushfire. Danak's mother, Leela, was found unconscious on a neighbor's lawn close to her burning mansion back in Anaheim Hills. She'd been stabbed in the stomach and her throat had been cut open. Leela remarkably survived her injuries and awoke from a coma 3 weeks after the attack to find that her husband and daughter had been killed and that her home had been ravaged by fire. Murtaza was subsequently arrested at a Phoenix airport while trying to return to his native Bangladesh. In 2011, in a jailhouse ceremony, he married 20-year-old suspected murderer Marissa Starr Bilotti, with whom he'd been corresponding for several months. Their union would eventually be shaken up by the course of justice, as Murtaza was sentenced to death for murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy in 2013. Number 4. William Riley Gaul. In November of 2016, a football player at Maryville College in Tennessee shot and killed his cheerleader ex-girlfriend, whom he'd reportedly been stalking following their breakup. William Riley Gaul was distraught after Emma Walker had ended their relationship in what he deemed to have been a cruel manner, as she'd reportedly told him, "You need a life." Walker was subsequently shot through the wall of her dorm room as she slept and suffered fatal injuries. Gaul would tell investigators that he'd last spoken to her around midnight, at which point she'd asked him to stop calling her. He claimed to have spent hours in the dorm's parking lot crying and looking at pictures on his phone, before going to bed at around 4:45. Cell phone data would place him near Walker's home at about 3:35 a.m., around the same time when the gunshots were reported. Friends of his testified that in the aftermath of the shooting, he'd asked if they knew how to remove fingerprints from a gun and where he could dispose of it. He claimed to have stolen the weapon from his grandfather and that he feared becoming a suspect in light of his connection to the victim. His friends contacted the police. Gaul was watched by the authorities and intercepted by them as he headed to throw the gun into the Tennessee River. He'd eventually admit to shooting Walker but claimed it only meant to scare her, hoping that she'd turn to him as a rescuer and their relationship could start anew. He was sentenced to life with parole eligibility after 51 years for first-degree murder, stalking, and tampering with evidence. Number 3. Yvonne Wu. In October of 2021, NYPD officer Yvonne Wu was charged with murder and attempted murder after shooting her former girlfriend and the woman's new partner. 31-year-old Wu had dated Jenny Lee, 8 years her junior, for about 2 years before they'd broken up. About a month prior to the incident, Wu, described as jealous and possessive in their relationship, was unable to move past the breakup. According to friends familiar with the situation, in the weeks leading up to the shooting, Lee and her new girlfriend, 24-year-old Jamie Liang, had been involved in an altercation with Wu. Lee didn't report it to the NYPD's Internal Affairs Bureau, believing she'd be able to handle the conflict on her own. In October, Wu lay in wait and ambushed the couple as they returned to their Brooklyn apartment. She opened fire, striking both Lee and Liang multiple times. The former survived and recovered in a hospital, but Liang succumbed to her injuries. But both neighbors and arresting officers reported she seemed calm and collected at the scene. Based on the latest updates on the case, she was taken to a hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. Today's topic was requested by Get 'Em Straight, Jess the Dark Angel, and Christian. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Ahmed Shabazz. On November the 14th of 2019, Swedish teenager Wilma Anderson from the town of Uddevalla was reported missing. The local authorities, with support from the Swedish Armed Forces, searched for her in an operation that also involved divers and a mini submarine. Within a week, her ex-boyfriend, 22-year-old Ahmed Shabazz, became the main suspect in her disappearance, and he'd been confirmed as the last person to have seen Anderson alive. On November the 28th, the authorities searched his home and found Anderson's severed head stashed away in a trolley in his bedroom. The head was wrapped in tin foil, and the authorities suspected Shabazz had kept it as a sickening memento. In spite of overwhelming evidence, he maintained his innocence. The authorities believe that Anderson had gone to the home to retrieve some of her belongings after the recent breakup, at which point she was murdered and dismembered by her enraged ex. Following a psychological evaluation, experts would determine that Shabazz didn't suffer from a serious or invalidating mental illness, but that he exhibited what was described as narcissistic personality traits as well as a remarkable lack of empathy. He was sentenced to life in prison but never admitted his guilt, while the rest of Anderson's body was never found. Number 1. Thomas Montgomery. In May of 2005, two people using the handles Marine Sniper and Tall Hot Blonde struck up a relationship in an online chat room. As they began conversing, Tall Hot Blonde revealed she was a softball-playing high school senior from West Virginia named Jessie. Marine Sniper was actually Thomas Montgomery, aged 46, a married father of 2 from Buffalo, New York. But he decided to pose as a young, Iraq-bound Marine named Tommy in his talks with Jessie. The pair exchanged photos seemingly confirming their identities, with factory worker Montgomery using those from his army boot camp when he was younger. They eventually confessed their love to each other and had virtual relations, but also exchanged love letters and mementos, with Jessie sending Montgomery a pair of red panties. Speaking about the relationship, Montgomery later told a media outlet, "It became more real to me than real life," and compared it to a drug. Notes written to himself revealed that he'd begun to lose touch with reality, as he claimed his old self no longer existed and that he'd become his avatar. Problems arose after Montgomery's wife found out about his cyber life and sent Jessie a letter with a photo of him, revealing who he truly was. Jessie promptly broke off the relationship and began talking to one of Montgomery's work colleagues, a 22-year-old machinist named Brian Barrett, who used the screen name Beefcake. Montgomery watched their love blossom in the same chat room, and his subsequent messages became violent. Montgomery told Jessie that Brian will pay in blood, and became enraged upon learning that they were planning to meet in real life. On September the 15th of 2006, maddened by jealousy, Montgomery used a military rifle and executed Barrett in the parking lot of the factory where they both worked. The police learned about the love triangle from co-workers and believed that Montgomery would target Jessie next. Upon arriving at her home address, they were greeted by a middle-aged woman named Mary Schuyler. A shocking revelation followed as she admitted to being Tall Hot Blonde. She'd been talking to both Barrett and Montgomery while using the pictures of her daughter, the real-life Jessie, without her knowledge. Schuyler wasn't charged with anything, but her husband divorced her and Jessie cut ties. Montgomery, concretely linked to the killing of Barrett by DNA from a peach pit found at the scene, was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Thanks for watching. Would you rather get rejected for a job because you mispronounced the interviewer's name, or because you were legitimately unqualified? Let us know in the comments section below.